Frank Miller had survived 67 Montana winters, the kind that turned diesel to sludge and split fence posts down the grain. He'd buried friends in Vietnam, mud, and laid his wife Margaret in frozen earth 5 years past. He thought himself acquainted with every flavor of hardship the world offered a man. But on the night of November 12th, 2024, when four strangers in leather pounded his diner door while a blizzard clawed the high plains into submission, Frank discovered something. There exist decisions harder than choosing which direction to patrol when every shadow might conceal an enemy. This time, no sergeant barked coordinates. No helicopter waited over the next ridge. Just a door, four men dying by inches in sub-zero hell, and the code Frank had carried since boot camp at Paris Island. Whether that code was worth dying for at his age, that was the question humming beneath his sternum as his hand found the lock. The Silver Creek Diner sat 12 miles from Cutbank, the only structure on a 20-mile stretch of Route 213 that didn't belong to the Bureau of Land Management. Frank had bought the place in '89 with his discharge bonus and 30 years of savings, back when Margaret still had color in her cheeks and Emma was learning to walk between the booths. The chrome fixtures were original 1963, the vinyl seats patched in places but clean. A good life lived between these walls. 3 decades of coffee poured and eggs scrambled and stories traded, with truckers hauling freight to Glacier Country. Now Frank stood behind the counter at 7:30 on a Wednesday evening, wiping down formica he'd already cleaned twice. His hands moved with precision born of repetition, left to right, circular motion at the corners, check for missed spots. The same way he'd field stripped his M14 in the Quang Tri province. Some habits never fade. Through the front windows, the snow came sideways, thick as wool, erasing the highway from existence. The temperature gauge outside the kitchen read -18 before wind chill. Meteorologists on the television had stopped pretending this was manageable. They just told people to stay inside and pray. Frank's phone buzzed against the counter. Emma's face filled the screen, graduation photo from 2 years back, cap tilted at an angle that made Margaret laugh. He accepted the call. The worry in his daughter's voice needed no preamble. "Dad, you still at the diner?" He glanced at the clock. 30 minutes passed when he should have locked up. "Heading out in 10. News says the storm's getting worse. They're calling it catastrophic." Frank looked at his reflection in the dark window glass. 67 years stared back, lean and weathered. The scar running down his left forearm, shrapnel from a mortar round in '69, caught the fluorescent light. "I know what they're saying. Promise me. Don't be stubborn." The old argument. Frank being stubborn was like Montana being cold, a fundamental property of the thing itself. But Emma had Margaret's capacity for worry, and Frank had learned long ago that some battles weren't worth winning. "I promise, sweetheart. You study for that exam." A pause, then her voice softened. "Love you, Dad. Love you too." The call ended. Frank set the phone down and stood motionless, studying Emma's photo. She had her mother's eyes, that same blend of steel and gentleness that had saved Frank from himself when he came home from Southeast Asia with too much anger and not enough words. Margaret saw through the rage to the hurt underneath and gave him a job washing dishes in this very diner. 6 months later, he married her. Best decision he ever made, trading fury for purpose. Now Emma wanted to move to Seattle, chase some writing dream that terrified Frank in ways he couldn't articulate. He kept finding reasons she should stay. His heavy coat hung by the kitchen door, canvas duck material over wool lining, gloves in the pockets, Stetson on the hook. Frank was reaching for his keys when the sound hit the front door. Not a knock, a pounding. Heavy, desperate, the sound of fists striking glass hard enough to crack it. Frank's body responded before his mind caught up. A drop into ready stance, a weight balanced, hand moving toward the pistol. Combat reflexes don't fade. They just wait. He moved to the window, staying to the side where the angle gave him view without exposure. 4 shapes pressed against the glass, dark masses in the whiteout. Big men, made bigger by winter gear and desperation. The pounding came again, accompanied by a voice barely audible over the wind. "Please, we need help." Frank's eyes adjusted to the darkness beyond the glass. Leather jackets, motorcycle vests beneath heavy coats. Even through frost and snow, the silhouettes were unmistakable. He knew those profiles the way a soldier knows the shape of enemy rifles at distance. His jaw tightened. The voice came again, cracking with cold. "We're freezing to death out here." Frank's hand rested on the pistol grip. In Vietnam, the calculus had been simple. Identify threat, neutralize threat, survive to tomorrow. Here the mathematics turned murky. These men weren't enemy. They were Americans, fellow citizens, perhaps veterans themselves. They were also dying by degrees on his doorstep. The thermometer didn't lie, and at -18 with wind pushing the real feel toward -40, human tissue surrendered its heat in minutes, not hours. He thought of Margaret's voice, a ghost in his memory. "Frank Miller, you help people. That's who you are. That's who I married." He thought of the sergeants at Khe Sanh who taught him that mercy could get you killed. He thought of Emma's graduation speech about courage being the choice to act despite fear. Frank's hand moved to the deadbolt. Not quickly, nothing about Frank moved quickly anymore, but with the certainty of a man who'd already made his decision. He kept his thumb on the pistol's safety and cracked the door 3 inches, chain latch engaged. His voice came out flat, command tone from a lifetime ago. "State your business." The nearest face materialized from the snow, bearded, ice-crusted, lips blue, eyes wide, with something beyond fear. Recognition, maybe, the look a dying man gives the last help he'll ever see. "Sir, we broke down 6 miles back. Been walking in this storm." The words came between chattering teeth. "We're hypothermic. Just need to warm up, please." Frank assessed through the gap. 4 men ranging from maybe 30 to late 50s. Faces red and raw from exposure. Violent shaking that went beyond shivering into convulsion territory. Eyes glassy, but not aggressive. The desperate clarity of men who know they're minutes from shutdown. Their hands, what he could see of them, were wrong colors. Purple, white, the beginning of frostbite. The bearded one met Frank's gaze directly. "We'll die out here." Simple statement. No manipulation, no pleading. Just fact delivered by someone trained to assess tactical situations. Military bearings showed through even in extremis. Frank calculated. 4 men, possibly armed though their hands were too frozen to be useful. Even if they intended harm, and Frank's instincts said they didn't, their immediate concern was survival. Help them and risk trouble. Turn them away and guarantee death. Not murder exactly, but close enough to whatever word existed for killing through inaction. He removed the chain latch and stepped back, hand still on his pistol. "Get in, but know this, I'm armed and I know how to use it." Wind tore the door from his grip as he opened it, slamming it against the interior wall with a crash that rattled dishes. The 4 men stumbled inside more than walked, a tangle of frozen limbs and survival instinct. Frank threw his weight against the door, jointed after a moment by one of the men whose hands were blue but still functional. Together they forced it shut against the gale. Frank turned the deadbolt with a metallic snap that seemed loud in the sudden absence of wind. For several seconds nobody moved. Just the sound of labored breathing and the storm's fury muted by walls and glass. Frank stood with his back to the door, hand visible on his pistol, studying the 4 men now occupying his diner. Under the fluorescent lights they looked worse than he'd thought. The biggest one, 6'3" maybe, barrel chest, beard thick with ice, had the unmistakable bearing of a leader. The younger one with the shaved head couldn't have been past 30, hands so blue they looked frostbitten beyond help. The lean one in his 30s had alert eyes despite hypothermia, the kind of awareness that suggested training. The oldest besides Frank was shaking worst of all, barely staying upright. Now that they were inside, Frank could see their vests clearly, death's head insignia, wings, the words he didn't need to read to know. Hell's Angels Motorcycle Club, Great Falls Chapter. The big one raised his hands slowly, palms out. "Sir, we mean no harm." Frank noted the sir. Military courtesy. Interesting. "Stop right there, all of you." They froze. Good discipline. They respected authority, or at least recognized it when they heard it. "We're from Great Falls Chapter," the big one continued, words still slurred by cold. "Heading to Helena. Funeral for a brother. Storm caught us." Frank's eyes flicked to each man in turn, reading them the way he'd learned to read point positions in the jungle. Fear, yes. Exhaustion, absolutely. Threat, maybe. Immediate, no. These men were operating on fumes and adrenaline, focused entirely on the next breath, the next moment of not freezing. His training kicked in, Marine Corps combat lifesaver protocol flooding back after 50 years. Hypothermia, stage 2 minimum, possibly stage 3 for the oldest one. Confusion, loss of motor control, violent shivering. 10 degrees lower and they'd have been unconscious. Another hour and they'd have been corpses. Frank's voice came out harder than necessary, compensation for the empathy trying to soften his edges. Sit. That booth. He pointed to the nearest one. Don't move unless I say. They obeyed immediately, shuffling to the red vinyl seats like schoolchildren following the teacher. Frank moved to the thermostat and cranked it to 80. The ancient heating system groaned in protest but complied. He went to the storage room and returned with every blanket and towel he could carry, stacking them on the adjacent booth. Wrap up. Don't warm too fast. You'll shock your system. He retreated to the kitchen, keeping them in his peripheral vision through the serving window. The industrial coffee maker took 4 scoops to fill, water from the tap running warm but not hot. While it percolated, Frank filled plastic containers with water at body temperature, 98.6, the same warmth that kept a man alive in the field. Too hot would cause vasodilation and drop their core temps further. Too cold was useless. He remembered Rodriguez bleeding out in the jungle, remembered keeping him warm until the medevac arrived, remembered the precise temperature of the saline they used. Some knowledge you carry forever. When Frank returned to the dining area with supplies, the 4 men hadn't moved from the booth. They'd wrapped themselves in blankets, but their eyes tracked him with the intensity of animals uncertain whether they'd found sanctuary or different danger. Frank set down the containers of water and a stack of towels. He looked at them, these 4 strangers who'd forced him into choices he had hoped to avoid at 67. Here's how this works. You warm up, you drink, you wait till storm passes. You stay in my sight at all times. You don't touch anything I don't give you. First man steps out of line, all 4 go back in the snow. He let that settle. Clear? The big one nodded. Crystal clear, sir. We appreciate this more than you know. Frank returned to his position behind the counter, tactical high ground with clear sight lines to both the front door and the kitchen exit. He set his pistol on the Formica, hand near but not on it. A statement. Trust extended, not yet earned. Now, tell me who you are and why you're on my highway in a blizzard. The big one started speaking, words coming easier now that warmth was seeping back into his core. His name was Marcus Crawford, though they called him Bull. The Baldwin was Dylan Hayes. The lean-aware one was Asher Cole. The oldest was Leon Patterson, Duke to the club. They'd left Great Falls at noon thinking they'd beat the storm. Weather reports had been wrong before. They hadn't counted on the blizzard arriving 6 hours early and twice as vicious as predicted. Frank listened, asked no questions, assessed their story for holes. Found none. Sometimes the simplest explanation was just the truth. Then Leon slumped sideways. Dylan caught him before he hit the floor, shouting something Frank didn't process. Frank was already moving, around the counter in 3 strides, the pistol forgotten. He'd done this before. In the jungle, in the mud, with men bleeding and broken. This was just a different kind of dying. Lay him flat, feet up. Marcus and Dylan obeyed without question. Frank dropped to his knees beside Leon, fingers finding the carotid pulse. Weak but present, pupils dilated, skin clammy despite the blankets. Core temperature still dropping, the body shutting down non-essential systems to preserve the brain and heart. Stage 3 hypothermia, maybe worse. Frank looked up at Marcus. How long you been walking? 2 hours, maybe more. Lost track. Frank bit back the curse. 2 hours at -40 wind chill, Jesus. Get those wet clothes off him. Now. While Marcus and Dylan stripped Leon down to his thermals, Frank grabbed more blankets from storage. His knees protested. 67-year-old joints didn't appreciate kneeling on linoleum, but he ignored them. Pain was information, nothing more. He directed Dylan to move the space heater closer, but not too close, explained about gentle rewarming versus thermal shock, fell into the cadence of command that had defined his 20s. They worked together, the 4 of them, boundaries dissolving in the urgency of keeping Leon alive. Asher brought supplies without being asked. Marcus followed instructions with military precision. Dylan's hands proved steadier than they looked, the mechanic's touch translating to medical care. For 5 minutes, they weren't biker and civilian, outlaw and law-abiding citizen. They were just men executing a mission. Save the brother. Leon's eyes fluttered open, unfocused, confused but open. Where? Frank sat back on his heels. You're alive, that's where you are. Relief flooded the booth. Marcus exhaled hard, hand rubbing his face. Dylan's shoulders dropped. Asher closed his eyes briefly, lips moving in what might have been prayer. Frank stood, joints popping, and returned to his position behind the counter. But something had shifted. The pistol sat where he'd left it, but it felt different now, less necessary. Not safe exactly. Frank Miller hadn't survived Vietnam by trusting too quickly, but not the imminent threat he'd assumed. Marcus looked at Frank with new eyes. You know combat medicine. Not a question. Frank didn't answer immediately. Some truths arrived with complications attached. But these men had just watched him work and drawn their own conclusions. No point denying what was obvious. Vietnam, 68 to 70, Force Recon Marines, patched up more than my share. Leon, still weak but more present, turned his head to look at Frank. Thank you, sir. You saved my life. Frank waved it off, uncomfortable with gratitude. Saved it for now. Storm's not over. You boys still got a long night ahead. But Marcus was still studying him, respect clear in his expression. Marine Corps, that explains it. The way you move, way you talk, way you take charge. He paused. We got Army and Navy in our chapter. We recognize a warrior. Frank felt old suddenly, old and tired and uncertain how he'd ended up here. 67 years old, standing in his diner at 8 o'clock on a Wednesday night with 4 Hells Angels, one of whom he'd just pulled back from the edge. That was a long time ago, different man. Asher spoke for the first time since entering, his voice quiet but certain. No, sir. Once a Marine, always a Marine. My dad was Khe-Sanh. Frank's attention snapped to him. Khe-Sanh, what unit? 26th Marines, died in 72, cancer from Agent Orange. I was 3. The room went quiet. Frank knew Khe-Sanh, knew what those men had endured during the siege, the shelling, the endless days of wondering if supply lines would hold. Good men, hard men, the kind who held the line when holding it looked impossible. 26th held against everything Charlie threw at them. Frank's voice came out rougher than intended. Good men. I'm sorry. Asher nodded, accepting the recognition for what it was. One warrior acknowledging another across the gulf of years and loss. Marcus pulled his wet jacket tighter, though the diner was warming now. I did 2 tours. Iraq, 2005, 2007. Came back different. At club helped. Dylan spoke up, voice hoarse. Navy. Diesel mechanic on this carrier Roosevelt. Not combat, but I saw things. Leon managed a weak smile. Army, Germany, Cold War. Nothing like you boys. But I served. Frank looked at them with different eyes now, not bikers, veterans, brothers in the way only men who've worn the uniform understood. Different wars, different decades, same transformation. Boys sent overseas, men coming home, gaps between the two that never fully closed. The question came out before Frank could stop it. Why Hell's Angels? Marcus didn't flinch from the directness. Coming back from Iraq, nothing fit anymore. Civilians didn't get it. Family didn't know what to say. Got angry, got lost, got dangerous. He paused, choosing words carefully. Club gave me structure again. Chain of command. Brothers who understood what I'd seen. Purpose, code, mission. Frank understood more than Marcus knew. He'd come back from Vietnam with the same rage, the same disconnection. Only Margaret had kept him from going down roads that led nowhere good. Without her steady presence, without this diner and the routine it provided, Frank could have ended up wearing different colors, but walking the same path. You were willing to die to honor your dead, Frank said, and it wasn't a question. Marcus met his eyes. We don't leave brothers behind, living or dead. That's the code. Marine Corps Code 2. Frank had carried 2 dead men 12 miles through jungle in '69 rather than leave them for the enemy. His back still remembered the weight. The lights flickered. Everyone looked up. The fluorescent tubes dimmed, brightened, dimmed again. The heating system's fans stuttered, a grinding sound that spoke of failing motors and overworked machinery. For 3 seconds, the diner held its breath. Then the lights stabilized, but barely. Frank checked his watch. 8:45. He looked at the four men, at Leon still recovering, at Marcus and Dylan and Asher watching him for cues. Outside, the storm hammered the building with renewed fury, wind shrieking like something alive and malicious. If the power died, they had maybe 4 hours on the propane heater before the cold reclaimed the building. 4 hours in darkness with four bikers Frank had met an hour ago. The pistol on the counter wouldn't help if they decided cooperation had outlived its usefulness. Frank Miller stood at a crossroads. Keep them at distance, maintain control through threat, or trust them the way he'd trusted his squad in the jungle, completely, knowing his life depended on it. He'd survived 67 years by being careful, calculating odds, minimizing risk. But he'd also survived by recognizing when the mission changed. Frank picked up his pistol. 4 sets of eyes tracked the movement. He removed the magazine, ejected the round from the chamber, set both on the counter separately. The metallic sound seemed loud in the warm space. If we're doing this, Frank said, we do it together. Marcus stared at the disassembled weapon, understanding dawning. You're trusting us. I'm trusting that you're Marines and soldiers and sailors before you're bikers, and military takes care of its own. Frank moved from behind the counter, crossing the invisible line he'd maintained since they arrived. He pulled up a chair at the booth adjacent to theirs, sat down with the kind of tired that comes from carrying tension too long. Since we might be here all night, might as well talk. Dylan spoke up, his voice uncertain. You don't trust us yet. Why the change? Frank considered the question, decided it deserved honesty. You remind me of someone, myself 50 years ago. He looked at his hands, the scar tissue and age spots and tremor that came with too many winters. Came back from Vietnam angry, lost, could have gone down a bad road. He told them about the nightmares, the rage, the drinking, about the bar fight that almost ended with someone dead and Frank in prison, about Margaret seeing through his anger to the hurt underneath, about her giving him a job washing dishes, giving him purpose, giving him a reason to wake up that didn't involve finishing what the war started. Married her 6 months later. Best decision I ever made. Frank's voice caught, the grief still raw after 5 years. Lost her to cancer. February 20th, 2019. Leon, stronger now, but still weak, spoke quietly. I'm sorry. Frank waved it off. Point is, I could have been you. Club, anger, all of it. Only difference is I had Margaret. He looked at each of them in turn. So yeah, I'm giving you the benefit I got. Chance to be better than your worst day. Marcus leaned forward, elbows on the table. We're not perfect, Frank. Done things I'm not proud of. But we live by rules, loyalty, honor, protection, and we pay respects. That's why we're out in this storm. Tommy Sanchez, our brother. Funeral tomorrow in Helena. You were willing to die to make it there, Frank said. It wasn't accusation, just observation. Wouldn't be able to live with ourselves if we didn't try. Dylan stood slowly, testing his legs. Frank, with your permission, I'd like to check your heater. I'm a diesel mechanic, but I know HVAC. Might buy us time if the power goes. Frank evaluated the request. Dylan wanting access to utility areas could be reconnaissance for something worse. Or it could be a trained mechanic seeing a problem and offering to fix it. Frank had spent 50 years reading people. Sometimes you had to trust your gut. Go ahead, I'll watch. The utility room sat off the kitchen, cramped and smelling of grease and old metal. Dylan examined the ancient heating system with the focused attention of someone who spoke the language of machines. He made small adjustments, explained about airflow and pilot lights, worked with the efficiency of a man who'd spent his life making broken things functional. This thing's from the 70s, but built solid. I can improve efficiency, maybe 10%. Won't fix everything, but helps. Frank watched his hands, steady now that blood flow had returned. Competent hands. Where'd you learn this? Dylan didn't look up from his work. Foster kid. 47 different homes by age 18. Had to learn everything myself, fix things to make myself useful, so they'd keep me. Another piece of the picture. Dylan wasn't born into violence. He was forged by circumstance, by abandonment, by the foster system's well-intentioned failures. The club gave him what he'd never had, family that chose him, brothers who wouldn't send him back. They returned to the dining area to find Marcus had made fresh coffee and Leon sitting upright. Color returning to faces. Disaster averted. Frank poured himself a cup, black, and sat at a booth. Not behind the counter now. Just another man trying to get through the night. The lights dimmed again. Longer this time. 5 seconds of brownout that made the refrigerator's compressor whine in protest. When they came back, they carried a tentative quality, like the electrical grid was hanging on by threads. Dylan stood. We should inventory what we have if power goes. Flashlights, batteries, propane. Marcus joined him. Good call, Frank. Show us what you got. They worked together, these 5 men who'd been strangers 90 minutes ago. Frank directed them to supplies, flashlights and storage, battery-powered lanterns, extra propane tanks, emergency candles. The diner became organized chaos, everyone moving with purpose, military efficiency translating across branches and decades. At 9:15, the power gave up. No warning. Just the lights dying, the heater fan going silent, the refrigerator's hum cutting off mid-cycle. Darkness absolute except for the emergency exit signs running on battery backup. Frank heard someone curse, heard the scrape of chairs, heard his own breath loud in his ears. Then light. Dylan had found a lantern. The battery-powered LED cast harsh shadows, but pushed back the darkness enough to see. Asher followed with flashlights. Marcus located the propane lanterns, the kind that hissed and glowed warm. Leon stayed seated, but directed traffic, his voice stronger. Within 5 minutes, they transformed the diner into something that looked almost cozy. Lantern light reflected off chrome fixtures. Shadows danced on walls. The propane heater Dylan had optimized kept the space livable. It could have been 1970, could have been any decade before electricity became something taken for granted. Frank stood in the middle of his diner, surrounded by light and warmth, and 4 men who should have been enemies, but weren't. Marcus approached, coffee cup in hand. Thank you, Frank, for trusting us. Frank looked at the guns still disassembled on the counter, at Leon wrapped in blankets, at Dylan adjusting a lantern, at Asher checking the propane connections. Thank me when we're all alive tomorrow. Marcus smiled, the expression changing his face from hard to almost gentle. We're going to make it, all of us. Frank hoped he was right. Outside, the blizzard continued its assault, wind finding every crack and gap in the old building. The temperature would drop through the night. The propane wouldn't last forever. Morning was 8 hours away and anything could happen in that span. But for now, in this moment, Frank felt something he hadn't experienced since Margaret died. Purpose beyond routine. Connection beyond transaction. The particular warmth of men facing hardship together. The knowledge that they'd chosen trust over suspicion, despite every reason to do otherwise. Leon raised his coffee cup in a small salute. To Frank Miller, the Marine who still takes care of his own. The others raised their cups. Frank didn't know what to say, so he just nodded, lifted his own cup, drank coffee that tasted better than it had any right to. In the candlelight, his diner looked like something from memory, from a time before cell phones and internet, when being stranded meant being truly alone, except for whoever stood beside you. Frank had spent 50 years building a safe life, a careful life, a life that asked little and gave less. Tonight, that life had been stripped away. What remained was rawer, more dangerous, more real. The question was whether he'd survive it, or maybe the question was whether survival even mattered if you weren't really living. Outside, the storm screamed its answer, but Frank wasn't listening anymore. The propane heater hissed its steady rhythm, a sound that became the heartbeat of their survival. 10 o'clock marked 2 hours since the lights died. Frank stood at the kitchen door watching 4 men who'd transformed from strangers into something else. Not friends yet. Friendship required time Frank wasn't sure they had. But allies. Fellow soldiers in a war against cold and circumstance. Marcus caught his eye from across the room. Frank, you got food we can cook on that propane stove? Frank did. Eggs in the cooler, bacon, potatoes, comfort food, the kind that reminded a man he was alive. I'll cook. You boys have done enough. But Marcus shook his head. We work together or we don't work at all. That's how this goes. So they did. Frank at the stove directing operations like a drill sergeant. Marcus cracking eggs with surprising delicacy for hands that size. Dylan slicing potatoes with a knife he'd pulled from his own belt, the blade worn but sharp. Asher setting the table, 5 places. Like this was a family dinner instead of a survival situation. Leon wrapped in blankets but insisting on pouring coffee, his movements still careful but steady. The smell of frying bacon filled the diner, rich and ordinary and perfect. Frank hadn't realized how hungry he was until the food started cooking. They'd burned calories fighting the storm, fighting hypothermia, fighting fear. The body demanded payment. They sat at one long table, all 5 together. No barriers now, no counter separating the help from the helped. Just men sharing a meal. Frank watched them eat, noting the way they moved, the small courtesies. Marcus passing salt before anyone asked. Dylan cutting Leon's food without making it obvious. Asher checking that everyone had coffee. The unconscious choreography of people who knew how to operate as a unit. Frank, Marcus said between bites, you said force recon. That's elite. What was your job? Frank didn't talk about Vietnam. 54 years of not talking about it. But tonight felt different. Maybe because these men understood war. Maybe because the darkness and isolation stripped away the usual defenses. Scout sniper, deep jungle patrols, sometimes alone for weeks. Watching, reporting, eliminating targets when ordered. Asher's fork paused halfway to his mouth. How many confirmed? Military question. Direct. The kind civilians never asked because they didn't want to know the answer. Frank met Asher's eyes. Enough that I still dream about them. Not as many as I was ordered to take. Marcus leaned back, coffee cup warming his hands. You disobeyed orders? Frank had never said this out loud. Not to Margaret, not to Emma, not in 50 years. But the weight of it sat heavy tonight, demanding release. Once, 69 near the DMZ, VC commander in my sights. 800 yards, perfect conditions. But he was carrying a kid, his kid. Maybe 5 years old on his shoulders. The diner went quiet, only the hiss of the propane heater. I could have taken the shot. Command wanted him dead. My spotter was ready to confirm. But I couldn't kill a man in front of his son. Couldn't make that kid watch his father's head explode. Frank's hands tightened around his cup. Let him go. Radioed that I didn't have a clean shot. Command never knew. My spotter never told. Marcus nodded slowly, recognition in his eyes. That took more courage than pulling the trigger. Or weakness, still don't know which. Dylan spoke up, voice quiet. You chose to stay human, in a situation designed to make you into something else. That's not weakness. Frank looked at this young mechanic who'd grown up without family, who'd learned to fix things to make himself valuable, and saw something he hadn't expected. Wisdom. The kind that came from surviving circumstances that should have destroyed you. Marcus set his cup down with careful deliberation. Fallujah, 2005. We were doing house-to-house clearing. Lost 3 men in one day. My best friend, we called him Ghost, took rounds through a doorway. Dead before he hit the ground. The pain in Marcus's voice was fresh despite 20 years passing. Some losses didn't age. I carried him 4 blocks, already dead. Brain matter leaking through my fingers. But I carried him because that's what you do. You don't leave brothers behind. Marcus's jaw worked. That's when I understood what brotherhood really meant. Not blood family, chosen family. The people who'd carry you when you couldn't walk anymore. Frank knew that weight, literal and metaphorical. The heft of a dead man across your shoulders. The burden of promises made to men who couldn't hear them anymore. He'd carried 2 Marines out of the jungle in '69, Johnson and Ramirez. 23 and 19. Their families got bodies to bury instead of names on a wall. Small victory in a war full of defeats. Hell's Angels gave you that, Frank said. Understanding dawning. Same structure, same loyalty, different uniform. Marcus met his eyes. Exactly. I came home from Iraq and nothing fit. Tried to go back to normal. Job, apartment, girlfriend. But normal felt like a costume I couldn't wear. The club gave me back what the army took away when they discharged me. Mission, brothers, purpose. Leon shifted in his blankets, color fully returned to his face now. Can I tell you something, Frank? Something I've never said to anyone outside the club? Frank nodded. I had someone like Margaret, Linda, met her in '85, married her 2 years later. Daughter born in '88, beautiful family, everything I thought I wanted. Leon's voice dropped. Then I met the club, and I chose them over her. The confession hung in the air, heavy with regret. Linda begged me not to join, said choose us or them. I thought I could have both. I was wrong. Leon's hands trembled, but not from cold anymore. Lost 15 years with my daughter. She wouldn't speak to me. Missed her growing up. Missed her wedding. Missed the birth of my first grandchild. Frank had seen that particular grief before. In the mirror, every time he looked at Emma's photo and wondered if he was making the same mistake. 5 years ago, she called, after her divorce, said she finally understood what it meant to choose yourself even when it costs you everything. Leon's eyes were wet. She forgave me. We have Sunday dinners now. She brings the grandkids. They call me Papa Bear because of all the leather, but I still haven't forgiven myself, never will. The words hit Frank like incoming fire. I'm doing that right now, he heard himself say, with Emma, making your mistake. 4 sets of eyes turned to him. Frank's throat felt tight, but he pushed through it. She's 24, finished college, wants to move to Seattle, be a writer. I keep finding reasons she should stay. Help with the diner. Montana's safer. I need her. The truth tasted bitter. But it's not about any of that. I lost Margaret. Can't lose Emma too. So I'm holding her back, making her feel guilty for wanting to live her own life. Marcus's voice came gentle. That's not the same thing, Frank. You're her father. No, Frank cut him off. Leon's right. I'm choosing my fear over her dreams. That's not love. That's ownership. That's me being selfish because I'm scared of being alone. Dylan leaned forward. So what do you do? Frank looked at his hands. 67 years of wear showing in every line and scar. I let her go. Tell her to chase those dreams. Stop making her choose between her life and my comfort. The words felt like surrender and liberation simultaneously. Dylan stood, walked to the propane heater, checked the gauge. His face when he turned back made Frank's stomach drop. We have a problem. Tank's lower than it should be. 3 hours left. Maybe 4 if we're lucky. Before anyone could respond, Frank's portable radio on the back shelf crackled to life. The sound cut through the tension like a blade. Emergency broadcast, scratchy but clear enough. All units be advised. 4 male subjects, motorcycle club members. Last seen Route 213 near Cutbank. Welfare check requested by Great Falls Police Department. If located, notify authorities immediately. Static, then silence. Frank turned slowly to face the 4 men. Their expressions had gone carefully neutral. His hand moved reflexively toward where his pistol used to be on the counter. Disassembled hours ago. Empty space, Marcus spoke first, voice steady. That's us. Frank kept his tone measured. You boys wanted by the law? No, sir. Marcus's reply came quick. Chapter reported us missing when we didn't check in. They're worried. Called cops for welfare check. Not because we're in trouble. We're not fugitives, Frank. Just welfare check? Not warrants? Asher leaned forward. We're not criminals. Not the way you're thinking. Yeah, we've done time. Bar fights, minor stuff. But we're not wanted men. We're just brothers who disappeared in a blizzard. Frank studied each face. Saw truth. Saw fear of being misjudged but not guilt. His instinct said they were straight with him. He nodded once. Then we don't worry about it. When this is over, you call your chapter. That's all. Relief flooded the room. Marcus's shoulders dropped. This moment mattered, Frank choosing to believe them despite the broadcast. Thank you, Marcus said quietly, for trusting us, again. Frank waved it off. Something had deepened between them. Trust tested and holding, he turned his attention back to the propane crisis. Frank checked his watch, 10:45. 4 hours meant 2:30 at best. Temperature outside was still -15 according to the last reading. Without heat, the diner would become a tomb. There's a backup tank. Frank's voice came out flat. Outside, 20 feet from the back door. Everyone understood immediately what that meant. 20 feet in -15 weather with wind that could knock a man down. 2 minutes maximum exposure or risk hypothermia all over again. Maybe worse this time. Marcus spoke first. I'll go, youngest and strongest among us. Frank's response came automatic. No, my diner, my responsibility. Like hell, you're 67. Then we both go. Frank stood, decision made. Two-man team, standard protocol. Dylan grabbed rope from the storage room, the kind used to secure trash cans in high wind. He tied it around Frank's waist, then Marcus's, marine knot that wouldn't slip. Asher and Leon would hold the other end inside, ready to pull them back if things went wrong. Frank pulled on his heavy coat, gloves, looked at Marcus doing the same. In the lantern light, the biker looked younger than his 48 years, scared but determined. The combination Frank had seen in every combat situation that mattered. On my count, we move fast, no hesitation. Find the tank, secure it, I signal. You pull, I guide. If something goes wrong, Dylan hauls us both in. Marcus's response came crisp. Roger that. Military precision, the language they both spoke better than English. Frank opened the back door and winter tried to kill them immediately. Wind like a physical blow, cold that burned exposed skin, snow so thick it erased the world 3 feet beyond the threshold. Frank lowered his head and pushed forward, counting steps the way he'd counted paces through jungle. Muscle memory from a different war. 15 steps, 16, 17. His hands were already going numb despite the gloves. The cold found every gap in his coat, every vulnerable point. Behind him, Marcus's breathing came harsh and rapid. 18, 19, 20. Frank's boot hit the tank. He dropped to his knees, hands searching, finding the metal cylinder. Frozen to the concrete pad. Of course, nothing came easy. He yanked. Nothing. Marcus joined him, both pulling. The tank shifted but held. Frank's hands were losing sensation. 60 seconds outside. They had maybe another 60 before things got critical. Marcus met his eyes through the snow. No words needed. One more pull. Together. The tank broke free with a crack of ice that sounded like gunfire. Frank grabbed the valve, Marcus the base. Frank yanked the rope twice, signal. The line went taut as Dylan and Asher pulled from inside. They stumbled backward, dragged more than walking, the tank between them. Frank couldn't feel his hands, couldn't feel his face. His lungs burned with each breath of frozen air. The doorway appeared like salvation, warm light spilling out. They crossed the threshold and collapsed. Dylan and Leon were on them immediately, stripping off gloves, checking for frostbite, wrapping them in blankets. The tank sat on the floor like treasure recovered from an enemy stronghold. Frank's hands shook violently. Not fear, just the body trying to generate heat it had lost. Marcus beside him was shaking too, both of them wrapped in blankets like children. Dylan worked fast, disconnecting the spent tank, connecting the new one. The heater coughed, caught, resumed its steady hiss. Heat began flowing again. Crisis averted. 20 minutes later, Frank could feel his fingers. Marcus flexed his hands, testing circulation. They sat close to the heater, neither speaking, just existing in the aftermath of near disaster. Leon brought them coffee. You didn't have to do that. Could have sent us. Frank's laugh came out bitter. My place, my rules. Besides, you just recovered from hypothermia. We're all equal now, Marcus said quietly. What you did out there, that's brotherhood. That's earned trust. You could have made us go, made it in order, but you went yourself. That means something, and Asher crouched beside them. Hell of an initiation. Frank managed a smile, easier than Paris Island. They laughed, the tension breaking like spring ice. The clock read midnight. They'd been together 5 hours. Felt like days. Frank studied these 4 men, seeing them clearly now. Not threats, not even strangers anymore. Brothers. The word felt right even in his head. Tommy Sanchez, Frank said into the quiet. Tell me about him. The brother you're riding through hell to honor. Marcus's face softened. Tommy was chapter president before me, 53 when he died. Heart attack in his garage, working on his bike, doing what he loved. But there was more. Frank could hear it in the pause. Tommy took me in when I came back from Iraq. I was drinking too much, fighting everyone, about to end up dead or in prison. Tommy saw something in me I didn't see. Marcus's voice roughened. Made me road captain. Gave me responsibility. Taught me that anger's not the enemy. Lack of purposes. Showed me how to channel rage into leadership. Dylan nodded. Tommy did that for all of us. Found us when we were broken. Gave us a place to belong. So we ride in a blizzard to honor him, Marcus finished, because that's what brothers do. You don't let weather or danger or death stop you from paying respects. Frank understood completely. He'd have done the same for any of his squad from Vietnam. Would have walked through fire to stand at their graves. Asher's phone suddenly blazed to life in his pocket, the screen glowing bright in the dim diner. Everyone stared at it like a ghost had appeared. Signal, Asher whispered. He pulled the phone out. His face went white. 23 texts from his daughter, Sarah. Frank watched Asher's eyes move down the screen, reading messages that made his hands start shaking. She thinks I'm dead. Asher's voice broke. She texted all night, got more scared each time I didn't respond. Last message says she hates me and she's sorry she said it, and please don't be dead. Frank didn't hesitate. Call her right now. It's 12:30. She's awake. Frank's tone left no room for argument. Call your daughter. Asher pressed the number with trembling fingers. It rang once. Sarah answered before the second ring finished. Her voice came through the speaker, young and terrified. Dad? Baby, I'm okay. I'm safe. I'm so sorry I scared you. Asher was crying now, tears running down his face. We broke down in a storm. No signal until just now. I'm okay. I promise. Sarah's sobs came clear through the phone. I thought you died like Mom. I thought I lost you too. You're all I have left. I know. I'm sorry. I love you so much. I'm coming home. I promise you I'm coming home. The call lasted 5 minutes. When Asher finally disconnected, his hands were shaking and his face was wet, and he looked more vulnerable than he had frozen on the doorstep. Leon put a hand on his shoulder. Silent comfort from a man who knew what it meant to almost lose a daughter. Frank stared at his own phone. Signal was back. 1 bar, but enough. He thought about Emma asleep in her dorm room, unaware that her father had spent the night risking his life with 4 strangers, unaware that he'd finally understood what he needed to do. He dialed. It rang 4 times. Emma's voice came groggy. Dad, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Everything's fine. I just need to tell you something, and it can't wait. You're scaring me. Frank took a breath. Seattle, you should go. I've been holding you back, and it stops now. Follow your dreams. Be a writer. I'll be fine. The diner will be fine. Silence on the other end. Then Emma's voice, thick with emotion. You mean it? I mean it. Your mother would want you to live your life. So do I. I'm sorry it took me so long to say it. Emma was crying. I love you, Dad. I love you too, sweetheart. Now go back to sleep. We'll talk tomorrow. He ended the call. His eyes were wet, but he didn't bother hiding it. These men had earned the right to see him vulnerable. Marcus squeezed his shoulder. Silent approval. Dylan stood, paced to the window, looked out at the snow. When he turned back, his face held something Frank hadn't seen before. Raw honesty. Can I tell you guys something? Everyone nodded. I was a foster kid. 47 different homes by 18. Never belonged anywhere, never had a dad, never had brothers. Dylan's voice stayed steady but barely. Joined Navy to belong somewhere. That helped. But after discharge, I was empty again. He looked at Marcus. You found me working at a garage in Great Falls. We talked. You invited me on a ride just once, you said. That ride was the first time I felt like I had family. Not blood, not legal, but real. Dylan's eyes swept across all of them. These guys are my brothers. First family I ever chose. First that chose me back. He looked at Frank. Tonight you gave me that feeling again. Accepted me. Trusted me with your heater. Let me help. That means everything to a guy like me. Frank stood, crossed the distance between them, put his hand on Dylan's shoulder. You're a good man, Dylan. Any father would be proud to call you son. Dylan's smile transformed his face. Thank you, sir. They talked until 2 in the morning, stories flowing like the coffee, barriers dissolving in the darkness and warmth and shared survival. Leon talked about his grandkids. Asher talked about teaching middle school before the club. Marcus talked about learning to rebuild himself after war broke him. Frank talked about Margaret, about the 30 years they'd had together, about how she'd saved him from himself, about the empty house he went home to every night and how the diner had become refuge and prison simultaneously. At 2:30, Marcus stood, walked to the window. Storm's breaking. They all joined him. The wind had weakened. Snow still fell, but lighter now, more gentle. Through gaps in the clouds, stars appeared, sharp and cold and beautiful. Frank watched the storm dying and felt something shift in his chest. They'd survived. All 5 of them, against odds that should have killed them. He turned from the window to face Marcus. The words came without planning, without thought, just truth-demanding expression. I want to come with you. Marcus blinked. What? To the funeral. In Helena. I want to pay respects to Tommy, a man who saved his brothers. That deserves honor. Frank, you don't have to. I know I don't. I want to. Frank's voice gained strength. Besides, someone's got to make sure you boys get there safe. Leon smiled from his blankets. We'd be honored. Dylan frowned. But how, your truck? Frank met Marcus's eyes, held them. I'll ride with you, on a bike. The room went silent. Asher spoke first. Frank, when's the last time you rode? 1971, rode a Harley from California to Montana after my discharge. Haven't been on one since. Marcus's face split into a grin, genuine and wide and full of something that looked like joy. You're serious. I'm 67. This might be my last adventure. May as well make it count. Marcus crossed the room, held out his hand. Frank took it. The handshake turned into a hug, brief and hard. We'll get you set up at Great Falls. Tommy's bike is there. Rodriguez will let you ride it to the funeral. I can't take a dead man's bike. Tommy would love it. Old Marine riding his Harley to his funeral? That's poetry. Frank looked around the diner, at the candles burning low, at 4 men who'd stumbled through his door 6 hours ago as strangers and were leaving as brothers, at the propane heater still hissing its steady rhythm, at his life, small and safe and slowly suffocating, him ready to be left behind. Asher was grinning. Frank Miller, you're full of surprises. Frank allowed himself a small smile. I'm 67, spent 50 years playing it safe, building this place, being responsible. He looked at the life he'd constructed, the careful walls, the controlled risks. But tonight with you 4, I remembered something I forgot. Life isn't about not dying, it's about actually living. Leon raised his coffee cup. To living. They all raised their cups. A toast to survival and risk and choices made in the dark when everything safe had been stripped away. Outside, the storm's fury had gentled to a whisper. Inside, 5 men sat together in candlelight, bound by circumstance and choice, in the particular alchemy that transforms strangers into brothers. Frank Miller had opened his door 6 hours ago, expecting nothing more than a routine night. Instead, he'd saved 4 lives, risked his own, and rediscovered something he thought died with Margaret. Purpose beyond routine, connection beyond transaction. The visceral understanding that staying safe meant staying dead in all the ways that mattered. Dawn would come in 4 hours. With it, decisions about what came next, about riding to Helena, about letting Emma go, about whether a 67-year-old Marine could learn to live instead of just surviving. But for now, in this moment, Frank felt more alive than he had in 5 years, alive and terrified and exhilarated. The exact combination that meant you were doing something real. Marcus looked at him across the candle-lit space. Thank you, Frank, for tonight, for everything. Frank shook his head. Thank you for reminding me what it means to be a warrior, to have brothers, to choose courage over safety. The lanterns flickered. The propane heater hummed. Outside, Montana held its breath between storm and sunrise. and inside 5 men waited for dawn together, bound by survival and something deeper that had no name but felt like salvation. Gray light crept through frost-covered windows at 6 a.m., transforming the diner into something ghostly. Frank woke with his cheek pressed against vinyl, neck protesting decades of poor sleeping positions. The candles had burned to nothing. The propane heater still worked. Outside, the wind had died completely. He sat up slowly, joints announcing their displeasure. Across from him, Marcus slept with his head tilted back, mouth open, looking younger than 48. Dylan lay curled near the heater like a dog seeking warmth. Asher and Leon shared a booth, both snoring in harmony. Frank stood, testing his balance. 67-year-old muscles complained but obeyed. He moved to the coffee maker, muscle memory guiding him in the dim light. The propane burner caught on the first try. Small mercy. While water heated, he looked at the 4 men who'd invaded his careful life and blown it apart. No regrets. Not yet, anyway. Marcus stirred as coffee smell filled the space. His eyes open, focused on Frank, and something passed between them without words. Recognition. The particular bond of men who'd faced death together and come out the other side. Morning. Marcus's voice came rough with sleep. Frank poured 2 cups, brought one to Marcus. They stood at the window together, watching dawn paint the world in shades of pearl and silver. Snow had stopped completely. The landscape looked scrubbed clean, erased, ready for whatever came next. "We made it," Marcus said. Frank sipped his coffee. Now comes the hard part. By 7, everyone was awake, moving stiff but alive. They ate cold cereal and drank coffee and didn't talk much. Sometimes silence communicated better than words. Through the window, the sun climbed higher, revealing the full scope of what the storm had done. Snow drifted 4 feet high against the diner's north side. The highway had vanished under a blanket that stretched to the horizon. Dylan finished his bowl, set it down with deliberate care. "We should dig out the bikes, see if they survived." They bundled into coats and gloves, formed a line, pushed through the back door into air so cold it hurt to breathe. But the killing edge had dulled. This was Montana winter, familiar and manageable, not the apocalyptic fury of 12 hours ago. The bikes lay buried under snow like ancient artifacts. They worked together, shoveling with hands and boards and anything useful. Frank's back screamed protest, but he ignored it. Pain was information. He could process it later. Marcus's Road King emerged first, chrome and black metal under white powder. Then Dylan's Softail, Asher's Street Glide, Leon's Heritage Classic. They brushed snow from seats and handlebars with something approaching reverence. Dylan crouched beside each bike, checking components with a mechanic's practiced eye. 3 will start. Marcus, yours has electrical damage. We'll need to tow it. Marcus nodded, accepting the verdict without complaint. Dylan, you pull me. We'll manage. By 9, the bikes stood in a row, 3 engines rumbling like caged thunder. The sound carried across the empty plains, announcing survival to anyone listening. Frank stood watching them, these machines that had brought 4 men to his doorstep, and felt something shift in his chest. Not fear exactly, anticipation maybe. The growl of a different engine cut through the morning. Highway patrol vehicle cresting a plowed section of Route 213, light bar flashing red and blue against the white landscape. Frank watched it approach, felt the old wariness return. Authority meant questions. Questions meant complications. The vehicle stopped in the parking lot. Deputy Tom Harris emerged, mid-40s, wearing the careful expression of a man entering uncertain territory. His eyes registered the scene. 4 Hells Angels, Frank standing with them, bikes running. His hand moved toward his belt, but stopped short of the weapon. "Frank, you okay?" Frank stepped forward, putting himself between Tom and the bikers. "I'm fine, Tom. Better than fine." Tom's gaze flicked past Frank to the 4 men standing by their bikes. "You were alone here with them? All night?" The doubt in his voice made Frank's jaw tighten. "These men almost died on my doorstep. I gave them shelter. They helped me keep the heat running. They're good men, Tom, veterans." Tom's skepticism showed plain on his face. "Frank, these are Hell's Angels. They're Marines and soldiers and sailors." Frank's voice carried the snap of command that made younger men straighten their spines. And they're my friends. That's all you need to know. Something in Frank's tone must have communicated finality because Tom raised his hands in surrender. He walked to his vehicle, radioed in a brief report. When he returned, his expression had softened fractionally. Great Falls chapter's been worried sick. You should call them. Marcus pulled out his phone. Already did. They know we're alive. Tom looked at Frank for a long moment. Roads are clear back to Cut Bank. Power should be back at the diner by tonight. You should head home. Frank met his eyes without blinking. I'm going with them. Going where? Helena? Funeral for their brother, on a motorcycle. Tom stared like Frank had announced plans to swim to China. You're 67 years old. Notice that myself, Tom. Tell Emma I'll call her tonight. Tom shook his head, but he was smiling. Frank Miller, you crazy old Marine. He climbed back in his vehicle, gave a half salute through the window, drove away leaving tracks in fresh snow. Frank turned to find four bikers watching him with expressions ranging from respect to something approaching awe. Marcus spoke first. You just called us friends, to a cop. You are friends. What else would I call you? Leon wiped at his eyes, not crying but close. Most people would have thrown us out soon as the storm passed, pretended the night never happened. Frank walked to Tommy's bike, ran his hand along the cold metal. Most people didn't spend last night with you. I did. That changes things. Frank returned to the counter one last time, the diner feeling different in morning light. Smaller somehow, less significant. He picked up his Colt 1911 where it still sat disassembled. Magazine separate from pistol, exactly as he'd left it when he'd chosen trust over fear. He slid the magazine home with a click that echoed in the empty space. Chambered around. Engaged the safety, holstered it at the small of his back where it had ridden for 53 years. But the meaning had changed. Last night, he'd unloaded this weapon as an act of faith, proving to four strangers that trust could exist between men who had every reason to fear each other. This morning, he carried it as protection for the road ahead, not protection from the men who'd become brothers. The distinction mattered. He took his wallet, his keys, everything else could wait. They formed a convoy, 3 bikes running, Marcus's being towed behind Dylan. Frank climbed on behind Asher, awkward at first. Then muscle memory from 53 years ago kicked in. His arms wrapped around Asher's waist. The bike thrummed beneath him, alive and dangerous. Asher called back over his shoulder, "You good?" Frank's heart hammered, but his voice stayed steady. "Let's find out." They pulled onto the cleared highway, accelerating into Montana morning. Wind hit Frank's face like a slap. Cold air filled his lungs. The landscape blurred past, white fields and blue sky and mountains distant on the horizon. His hands gripped Asher's jacket, and for the first time in 5 years, Frank felt the particular rush of being completely present. Not thinking about yesterday, not worrying about tomorrow, just existing in this moment, this mile, this breath. They rode for 90 minutes, stopping once for gas and coffee at a station where the attendant's eyes went wide, seeing 4 Hells Angels and one old man who looked like somebody's grandfather. Frank paid for everyone's coffee, accepted their thanks with a nod, climbed back on the bike without hesitation. Great Falls appeared at 11, sprawling along the Missouri River under a sky so blue it hurt to look at directly. They navigated surface streets to a nondescript building on the industrial edge of town. 24 bikes sat outside. Men in leather vests moved with purpose. This was the clubhouse sanctum sanctorum of the Great Falls chapter. Marcus led them inside. The space smelled of motor oil and cigarettes and history. Photos covered the walls. Brothers in their prime, brothers gone, brothers memorialized. A bar ran along one wall. Pool tables occupied the center. This was where warriors gathered when the world outside made no sense. A man approached, maybe 50, solid build, sergeant's bearing. His vest read, "Rodriguez, Vice President." He embraced Marcus hard enough to crack ribs. "Thank God, we thought we'd lost you." Marcus pulled back, gestured to Frank. "This man saved us. Frank Miller, Marine Corps, Vietnam, Force Recon." Rodriguez's eyes widened fractionally. He extended his hand. "Sir, we owe you a debt." Frank took the handshake, felt the grip test his strength, returned pressure equally. They earned their own rescue. Good men, all of them. Rodriguez studied Frank with the intensity of someone evaluating whether to trust. Whatever he saw must have satisfied because he nodded once, decision made. Marcus says you want to ride to Tommy's funeral. I do, if that's acceptable. Rodriguez walked to a tarp-covered shape in the corner. He pulled the covering away, revealing a Harley Road King, 2018 model, midnight blue with chrome that caught light like water. Tommy's bike. Maintained it myself since he passed. Runs perfect. Frank approached slowly, reverence in his steps. He'd seen men pray with less devotion than Rodriguez showed this machine. I can't take a dead man's bike. You're not taking it, you're honoring it. Rodriguez pulled keys from his pocket. Tommy was K-San, 26th Marines. Same as Asher's dad. He'd want another Marine riding his bike to his funeral. That's poetry, Frank. That's what this is. Frank took the keys, felt their weight, felt the responsibility. I'll treat it with respect. I know you will. They gave Frank a leather jacket, worn soft with age. No club patches, but good quality. He put it over his flannel shirt, the material settling on his shoulders like armor. In a mirror hanging crooked on the wall, Frank caught his reflection. 67 years old, weathered and scarred, wearing leather and holding motorcycle keys. Margaret would have laughed. Then she'd have kissed him and called him beautiful. At noon, they rode out, 20 bikes strong. The entire Great Falls chapter rolled to honor their fallen president. Frank rode Tommy's Road King, hands remembering throttle control, body remembering how to lean into curves. The bike responded like a living thing, powerful and precise. He could understand why men loved these machines. They offered freedom in its purest form. Just you and the road, and choices made at 70 miles per hour. Montana highways stretched before them, 2 columns of chrome and leather cutting through wilderness. Frank rode near the back, flanked by Marcus and Asher, feeling protected and trusted simultaneously. The rumble of 20 engines shook his chest, wind tore at his jacket. His face went numb with cold, but he didn't care. This was living, sharp and real and immediate. They stopped once at an overlook where mountains rose like cathedral spires. Everyone dismounted, stretched, drank from thermoses of coffee. Leon appeared beside Frank, moving easier now, almost back to normal. How you holding up? Frank flexed his hands, working feeling back into frozen fingers. Best I've felt in 5 years. Leon smiled. Tommy's smiling somewhere, watching an old Marine ride his bike. He'd love this. They reached Helena at 2 p.m., navigating to St. Mary's Church on the north side of town. The parking lot held hundreds of bikes, chrome forest under afternoon sun. Chapters from Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, even a few from Washington. When a Hells Angels president died, brothers came from everywhere. Inside the church, Frank felt out of place until he saw the flag. American flag draped over Tommy's casket, covering him the way the nation covers its fallen. The sight hit Frank hard, unexpected grief for a man he'd never met. But he knew what that flag meant. Service, sacrifice, the particular contract you signed when you put on the uniform. They sat together, Frank and his 4 brothers, in pews that creaked under their weight. The church filled with leather-clad men who sat with military precision, stood when appropriate, showed respect that contradicted that every stereotype. These weren't criminals. They were soldiers finding structure after war ended. The service began with a pastor who knew his audience. No platitudes, no sanitizing. He spoke of Tommy's war record, his struggle coming home, his redemption through the club. Spoke of how one man's strength could save dozens of broken brothers. Spoke of legacy measured not in money or achievement, but in lives touched, men saved, purposes restored. Members spoke, stories of Tommy pulling them from darkness, of wisdom delivered with profanity and love, of a man who'd seen hell in Vietnam and refused to let it define him. Each story added layers to someone Frank would never meet but felt he knew. Marcus rose to speak. Frank watched his broad back, the way he carried himself to the front, the transformation from biker to eulogist. When Marcus spoke, his voice carried clear and strong. Tommy taught me being a man isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up, being there, never quitting. Marcus's voice broke slightly. He never quit on any of us. We won't quit on each other. That's his legacy. That's what these colors mean. He returned to his seat. The church settled into respectful silence. The pastor asked, "Anyone else wish to speak?" Frank stood before he'd consciously decided to move. 300 heads turned. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Who's the old guy?" Marcus's hand touched Frank's arm briefly, encouragement, then released. Frank walked to the front, each step carrying weight. He turned to face an ocean of leather and chrome and scarred faces. Men who'd seen things civilians couldn't imagine. Men who understood. His voice came out steady. "My name is Frank Miller. I didn't know Tommy Sanchez, but I know his brothers." He told them about the blizzard, 4 men at death's door, his choice to open the door, what he'd learned across 12 hours about courage and brotherhood, and the particular salvation that comes from choosing trust over fear. "I'm a Marine, Vietnam, 68 to 70. Same years Tommy served. We never met over there, but we were fighting the same fight." Frank's throat tightened, but he pushed through. "I came home and found my purpose in family, work, service. Tommy came home and found his purpose in this brotherhood. Different paths. Same destination, helping others." He paused, looking at faces watching him with absolute attention. "Last night, Tommy's brothers risked death to honor him, rode into a blizzard that should have killed them. That tells me everything I need to know about Tommy, about them, about what brotherhood really means." Frank's eyes found Marcus, then Leon, Dylan, Asher. "I spent 50 years judging from distance. Took one night to learn I was wrong. Tommy Sanchez, you raised good men. You'd be proud of them." He straightened, came to attention, rendered the salute he'd given countless times over fallen comrades. "Semper Fi, brother, rest easy." The church erupted, 300 bikers standing, applauding, some crying, all recognizing truth when they heard it. Frank returned to his seat, legs shaking, Marcus gripping his shoulder hard enough to bruise. At the graveside, they folded the flag with Marine Corps precision. 21 rifle shots cracked across the cemetery. Taps played, the notes carrying sorrow and honor across rows of white stones. Frank stood at attention, tears running freely, remembering Johnson and Ramirez and every brother he'd left behind. Marcus stood beside him, both old warriors paying respects to the fallen. When the ceremony ended, Marcus spoke quietly. "Thank you for coming, for speaking, for understanding." Frank's voice came rough. "Thank you for letting me." At the clubhouse reception, Rodriguez found Frank near the food table. "Can we talk? Private?" They moved to a back room where officers conducted club business. Rodriguez, Marcus, and 3 others Frank didn't know. The door closed. Rodriguez spoke with formal precision. "Frank, we want to offer you honorary membership. Hells Angels Motorcycle Club." Frank's breath caught. "I don't know what to say." Marcus leaned forward. "You don't have to ride with us, don't have to wear full colors, but you're our brother now. That means something. Means if you ever need anything, anywhere in the country, any chapter will help you. That's what the patch means. Family. I'm not a biker. I'm a diner owner." Rodriguez smiled. "You're a Marine. That's all we need to know. You took care of our brothers when they needed it most. That's what we do. What you did. You're one of us." Frank looked at these men offering him something precious. Not membership in a club. Membership in a family that chose you. That would ride through blizzards to honor you. That understood the particular loneliness of surviving when others didn't. "I'm honored. Truly." They gave him a patch. Honorary member. Smaller than full colors, but legitimate. He held it, felt the weight, understood what it represented. Connection. Purpose. Brothers who'd carry him when he couldn't walk anymore. At 5 p.m., they rode back toward Cutbank, just the original 5. The sun hung low, painting everything gold and crimson. Frank rode Tommy's bike, the engine a steady heartbeat between his legs. Montana spread before him. Endless and beautiful, and his in a way it hadn't been that morning. They stopped at an overlook where mountains touched Zwijnpark. Dismounted. Stood looking at wilderness that predated nations and would outlast them. Leon broke the silence. "Hell of a 24 hours. Laughter exhausted and genuine. Dylan stretched, vertebrae popping. "Since we almost froze to death? Yeah, I'd say so." Frank looked at his hands, still gripping the handlebars. Best 24 hours I've had in 5 years. Marcus moved beside him. Since Margaret? Frank nodded. She'd have loved this. Me on a bike at 67, riding with outlaws. She'd call me an idiot. Then she'd kiss me and say she's proud. Asher grinned. Sounds like a hell of a woman. She was. They reached Silver Creek Diner at 7 p.m., pulling into the parking lot as streetlights flickered on. Power had returned. The building glowed warm against gathering darkness. Home. Emma's car sat in the lot. Frank's heart jumped. He'd called earlier, but hearing her voice and seeing her were different things. She emerged from the diner as engines cut off, came running, threw herself into Frank's arms with enough force to stagger him. Dad! Oh my God, Dad! He held her tight, breathing in her shampoo, feeling her alive and real and his daughter. I'm okay. I'm good. She pulled back, saw the bike, saw 4 bikers, saw the leather jacket. You rode a motorcycle at 67? Had to. Long story. He introduced everyone. Emma shook hands, studied each face, seemed to measure them against some internal standard. Whatever she saw satisfied because she smiled. Thank you for keeping him alive. Marcus's expression softened. He kept us alive first. Your father's a hell of a man. You should be proud. Emma looked at Frank, really looked, and he saw her register the change. Something in his eyes or posture or the way he carried himself. I am proud. Yeah, I am. I always have been. They went inside together, all 6. Frank cooked while Emma helped, falling into familiar rhythms. Steaks, eggs, hash browns, the food of celebration and survival. They sat at one long table, Emma between Frank and Asher, listening to stories that made her laugh and cry and shake her head in disbelief. So you went into the blizzard for propane? Frank nodded. Marcus and I, 2-man team. Dad, you could have died. Could have, didn't. He met her eyes. That's what living looks like sometimes. Risk, choice, doing the thing that scares you. Emma's throat worked. When do I leave for Seattle? Frank set down his fork. Next week. Sooner if you want. I meant what I said on the phone. What about the diner? I'll hire a manager. I'll still run it, but less. Gonna ride more, see the country, maybe write a book myself. Emma laughed through tears. About what? About 4 men in a blizzard and an old Marine who learned to live again. She hugged him across the table, hard enough to make him wheeze. I love you so much. I love you too. Now go live your life. Make me proud. At 10 p.m., the bikes fired up for the last time that night. Goodbyes stretched, laden with things unsaid. Leon gripped Frank's hand. You ever need anything. Dylan's hug was brief but fierce. Thanks for trusting me, Frank. Means everything. Asher held Frank's shoulders. My daughter wants to meet you. Real war hero, she says. Frank's laugh came bitter. I'm no hero, just a man who did his duty. That's what heroes say. Marcus stood last, both of them aware this parting carried different weight. See you on the road, brother. Frank didn't hesitate. Count on it. They rode into darkness, taillights fading like stars going out. Frank and Emma stood watching until silence reclaimed the night. She looked at him in the parking lot glow. You're different. I know. It's good different. Frank nodded. Feels that way. 1 week later, Frank Miller stood on a Seattle sidewalk, holding a motorcycle helmet and looking at an apartment building that represented his daughter's future. He'd ridden 800 miles in 2 days, stopping at the Spokane Hells Angels clubhouse, where they gave him coffee and a bed and treated him like family. Marcus had called ahead. Word traveled. Emma opened the door at his knock, shock and joy fighting for dominance on her face. Dad, what are you doing here? Checking on my daughter, making sure Seattle's treating you right. You rode here? That's 800 miles. Got here in 2 days. Not bad for an old man. He grinned. Stopped at a clubhouse in Spokane. Brothers there said Marcus called ahead. Emma pulled him inside, laughing and crying and shaking her head. They talked for hours, Frank telling her about the ride, about wind and freedom, and the particular joy of choosing uncertainty over safety. Emma told him about her apartment, about an interview tomorrow at a publishing house, about being scared and excited simultaneously. When Frank stood to leave, the sun was setting, painting Puget Sound orange and gold. Emma walked him to his bike, Tommy's bike, the machine that had carried him from one life into another. "What's next for you, Dad?" Frank swung his leg over the seat, settled his weight, felt the familiar rightness of it. "Great Falls chapter invited me to ride with them next weekend. After that, maybe California. Never seen the Pacific." Emma touched his shoulder. "Be safe." Frank started the engine, let it rumble beneath him. "I'll be brave. There's a difference." He rode away from Seattle, watching Emma in his mirror, waving until he turned a corner and she disappeared. The city gave way to highway to open country. He had miles to cover before dark, decisions to make about where to stop, freedom to change plans without asking permission. Frank Miller was 67 years old. He'd survived Vietnam, married the love of his life, buried her with honors, raised a daughter who'd become everything good he'd hoped. He'd spent 50 years building a safe life, a careful life, a life that asked little and gave less. Then four strangers pounded his door in a blizzard and everything changed. People asked why he'd let them in. Danger, risk, every reason to keep that door locked. He told them about duty, about Marines never leaving men behind, about doing what's right when it's terrifying. But the deeper truth sat heavier. Opening that door saved his life as much as theirs. He'd been dead since Margaret passed, going through motions, playing it safe, waiting to die. Marcus, Dylan, Asher, Leon reminded him what he'd forgotten. Life isn't about not dying. It's about showing up, being present, never quitting. Frank rode through Washington evening with wind in his face and purpose in his chest. His daughter was chasing dreams in Seattle. His brothers were scattered across 5 states. His diner would be there when he returned. Everything that mattered was ahead of him, around him, inside him. Sometimes courage looks like opening a door. Sometimes it looks like letting your daughter go. Sometimes it looks like getting on a motorcycle at 67 and riding into the unknown. But it always means doing what's right despite being terrified. Frank had learned that lesson on November 12, 2024, in a diner in Montana, with 4 men who should have died, and an old Marine who learned that survival meant nothing without living. Some lessons take 67 years, but better late than never. Better alive than safe. Better to risk everything than to keep nothing. The highway stretched ahead, infinite with possibility. Frank twisted the throttle and the bike surged forward, carrying him toward whatever came next. He didn't know where he'd sleep tonight, didn't know what tomorrow held. For the first time in 5 years, he didn't need to know. He just needed to ride.